You wake up to the sound of a factory whistle piercing through the thick, sooty air at 5 in the morning. The sun hasn't even thought about rising yet, but that doesn't matter. Time isn't measured by daylight anymore. It's measured by the relentless tick of machinery and the demands of profit. You stumble out of your cramped, shared bed in a boarding house that reeks of unwashed bodies and industrial smoke. Your lungs already feel heavy from the air you've been breathing all night, and you haven't even stepped foot inside the mill yet. Welcome to Victorian factory life, where childhood ends before it begins, where your body becomes just another cog in an endless machine, and where every breath you take is a gamble with death. This isn't the romanticized version of the Industrial Revolution you might have heard about in school. This is the reality that millions of men, women, and children faced every single day for decades. A reality where progress came at the cost of human suffering on an unimaginable scale. The year's 1800 and something, and you're about to discover what it really meant to work in one of Britain's booming textile factories. You'll spend the next 12 to 14 hours in conditions that would make a modern workplace safety inspector have a complete breakdown. And the worst part, you'll consider yourself lucky to have this job at all. You throw on the same clothes you've worn for weeks because washing them means losing precious hours of sleep. And sleep is the only escape you have from this nightmare. Your breakfast, if you can call it that, consists of whatever scraps you managed to save from yesterday's meager meal. Then you join the flood of hollow-eyed workers shuffling through the streets toward the massive brick building that dominates the skyline like a prison. The factory looms ahead of you, belching black smoke into the already poisoned sky. Windows line the walls, but many of the lower ones are covered to keep you focused on your work instead of dreaming about the world outside. You can hear the machinery before you even reach the entrance. A deafening roar that will assault your ears for the next 14 hours straight. There's no gradual warm-up to your day, no easing into the work. The moment you step through those doors, you're thrown into chaos. The air inside hits you like a wall. It's thick with cotton dust, metal particles, and the sweat of hundreds of bodies packed together in spaces designed for maximum efficiency, not human comfort. The humidity is kept artificially high because the cotton fibers work better that way, which means you'll be soaked in your own perspiration within minutes. Your clothes will stick to your skin, and breathing becomes a conscious effort rather than an automatic function. If you're lucky enough to be assigned to one of the spinning machines, you'll spend your day watching hundreds of bobbins fill with thread while dodging the massive contraptions that could crush you in an instant. These machines don't care if you're tired, if your attention wanders for even a second, or if you're just a child who should be playing outside instead of crawling under dangerous equipment. They keep moving at their predetermined pace, and you either keep up or get left behind. The noise is beyond description. Imagine every mechanical sound you've ever heard amplified 100-fold and played simultaneously for 14 hours without pause. Conversations become impossible unless you develop your own system of hand signals or learn to read lips. Many workers lose their hearing entirely within a few years, but that's considered an acceptable cost of doing business. After all, deaf workers can still operate machinery. Your supervisor walks between the rows of machines like a predator stalking prey, watching for any sign of slacking, daydreaming, or unauthorized rest. Getting caught sitting down even for a moment means immediate punishment. A strap across your back, a fine deducted from your already pitiful wages, or hours added to your already endless shift. Some overseers get creative with their discipline, finding new ways to humiliate and control their workers because they can. The children around you, some as young as 5 or 6 years old, scurry between the machines like frightened mice. They're called scavengers, and their job is to crawl under the moving equipment to collect loose cotton fibers and clean up debris. One wrong move, one moment of exhaustion-induced clumsiness, and they could be crushed by machinery that weighs several tons. You've seen it happen, and the image never leaves your mind. These aren't just random kids who wandered in looking for work. Many of them are bound by legal contracts called indentures that essentially make them property of the factory until they reach adulthood. Their parents signed them over in exchange for a few coins, or they were handed over by workhouse officials who saw them as nothing more than a burden to be disposed of. Some of these contracts last for 10 years or more, meaning a child's entire youth is spent in this hell. The dust you're breathing isn't just uncomfortable, it's slowly killing you. Cotton particles settle in your lungs and stay there, causing inflammation and scarring that makes every breath a struggle. Workers develop a condition that leaves them gasping for air and coughing up blood, but there's no such thing as sick leave. You work until you literally can't stand anymore, and then you're replaced by someone desperate enough to take your place. Accidents are so common, they're barely worth mentioning. Fingers get caught in machinery and torn off. Workers slip on the oil-slicked floors and break bones. Children fall asleep on their feet and stumble into moving parts. The lucky ones die quickly. The unlucky ones survive with permanent disabilities that make them unemployable, which in this world is essentially a death sentence. Your lunch break, if you get one, lasts exactly 40 minutes. Sometimes the food you brought from home is so covered in factory dust that it's inedible, but you eat it anyway because it's all you have. Other times, you're so exhausted and overheated that you can't manage to swallow anything at all. The overseers don't care if you're starving. They just want you back at your station on time. The only toilet facilities are wooden seats placed over buckets in small rooms that reek of human waste. These were considered cutting edge when they were installed, but they're really just another way to minimize the time you spend away from the machines. Every minute you're not producing something is a minute of lost profit, and profit is the only thing that matters in this world. As the hours drag on, your body begins to shut down. Your back aches from the constant stooping and repetitive motions. Your feet swell from standing on hard floors for 14 hours straight. Your eyes burn from the dust and strain of focusing on tiny details in poor lighting. But the machines don't slow down, so neither can you. The clock on the factory wall becomes your obsession, but you soon learn that some owners manipulate these timepieces to squeeze even more work out of their already exhausted workforce. They slow the clocks during the day to make your shift feel longer, then speed them up at night so you get less rest before the next day's torture begins. This is just the beginning of your journey into the dark heart of Victorian industrial life. Tomorrow, we'll discover what happens when your shift finally ends and you stumble back into a world that's been poisoned by the very progress that promised to save it. That promised to save it. When your shift finally ends, you don't feel relief. You feel nothing at all because feeling requires energy you no longer possess. The factory whistle screams again, signaling the end of another day in hell, but your ears barely register the sound anymore. You shuffle towards the exit, along with hundreds of other broken souls, moving like sleepwalkers through a nightmare that never ends. The fresh air outside should feel like salvation, but it doesn't exist. The sky above is permanently stained black from the smoke of dozens of factories just like yours, all belching their poison into the atmosphere 24 hours a day. The rain that falls isn't water anymore. It's acid that eats through clothing and burns skin. Everything it touches turns gray or black, from the buildings to the trees to the people themselves. You join the river of workers flowing through streets that look like something from the depths of hell. The houses packed along these roads were thrown up as quickly and cheaply as possible to accommodate the flood of people desperate for factory work. Entire families cram into single rooms with no windows, no ventilation, and no privacy. The smell hits you before you even reach your boarding house. Human waste, rotting food, and unwashed bodies create a stench so thick you can taste it. Your landlord crammed as many people as possible into every available space because desperate workers will pay anything for a place to collapse at night. You share your bed with 2 other factory workers, and you sleep in shifts because there simply isn't room for everyone to lie down at the same time. The mattress, if you can call it that, is a collection of rags stuffed with whatever cheap material was available. It's crawling with insects and soaked with the sweat and bodily fluids of everyone who's used it before you. The water you drink comes from wells contaminated by factory waste and human sewage. Every gulp is a roll of the dice with diseases that can kill you in days or leave you suffering for years. Cholera, typhoid, and tuberculosis spread through these overcrowded neighborhoods like wildfire. Entire families die within weeks of each other, and their bodies are carted away to mass graves because individual burials are a luxury no one can afford. Your dinner consists of whatever scraps you manage to buy with your pathetic wages. Bread so stale it could break your teeth. Meat so rotten it's green around the edges, but still costs more than you can afford. Milk watered down until it's basically white-tinted liquid that provides no nutrition whatsoever. Factory owners don't care if you're slowly starving to death as long as you can still operate their machines. Children in these neighborhoods don't play games or attend school because childhood is a concept that doesn't exist for the working class. 5-year-olds work 14-hour shifts in factories, then come home to help take care of younger siblings or contribute to whatever piecework their families do to earn extra pennies. They develop rickets from malnutrition, their growth becomes stunted from overwork, and their minds never develop properly because they're denied any opportunity for education or normal childhood experiences. The lucky ones die young before the full horror of their situation becomes clear to them. The unlucky ones survive to adulthood as broken, twisted versions of what human beings should be. They live their entire lives in pain, struggling to breathe through damaged lungs, walking on deformed legs, and trying to work with hands that have been mangled by machinery. Women face additional horrors that the men around them pretend not to see. Factory overseers use their power to exploit female workers in ways that go far beyond demanding longer hours or accepting lower wages. Young girls have no protection from predators in positions of authority, and complaining about abuse means losing the job that keeps your entire family from starving to death. Sleep, when it finally comes, brings no peace. You're so exhausted that you collapse into unconsciousness rather than drifting off naturally. Your dreams are filled with the sounds of machinery, the screams of injured workers, and the constant pressure of knowing that tomorrow will be exactly the same as today. You wake up multiple times during the night, coughing up blood and cotton dust, your body trying desperately to expel the poison you've been breathing for months or years. Some nights, you don't sleep at all because the person sharing your bed is dying from one of the diseases that plague these neighborhoods. You listen to them struggle for breath, knowing that you could be next, and that no one would particularly care if you were. Death becomes so common that it loses its impact. Bodies are discovered every morning, and they're removed like garbage because that's essentially what they've become in this system. The few hours you have between shifts aren't enough to recover from the previous day's abuse, let alone prepare for the next day's torture. Your body never gets a chance to heal. Your mind never gets a moment of genuine rest. And your spirit slowly dissolves under the constant pressure of survival. You become less human and more like the machines you operate, functioning purely through mechanical repetition without thought or feeling. Religious leaders preach about the dignity of honest work and the moral value of industry, but they've never spent a single day breathing factory air or watching children die from preventable accidents. They speak from comfortable pulpits to well-fed congregations about accepting your lot in life, while the people creating their nation's wealth slowly rot away in conditions that would be considered torture in any civilized society. The government officials who pass laws about factory conditions have never set foot inside the buildings they're regulating. They rely on reports from factory owners who lie about everything from working hours to safety conditions to the ages of their youngest workers. Inspectors, when they exist at all, are warned in advance of their visits, giving owners time to hide their worst abuses and present a sanitized version of industrial reality. This is the true face of progress during the Victorian era. While inventors and entrepreneurs built fortunes that would last for generations, millions of ordinary people sacrificed their health, their families, and their lives to make that progress possible. They were told their suffering was necessary for the greater good, that their children would benefit from the prosperity they were creating through their pain. The machines that promised to make life easier instead made life unbearable for the people who operated them. Technology that could have liberated human beings from backbreaking labor instead enslaved them to a rhythm of production that treated people as disposable components in an ever-expanding system of manufacturing and profit. And tomorrow, when that whistle screams again at 5 in the morning, you'll wake up and do it all over again because the alternative is starvation in the streets. This is your life now, and this is how it will remain until your body finally gives out completely. Your body begins to betray you in ways you never imagined possible. After months of breathing cotton dust and metal particles, your lungs feel like they're lined with sandpaper. Every breath becomes a conscious effort, and you develop a cough that never goes away. The sound echoes through the boarding house at night, joining the chorus of other workers hacking up blood and fragments of whatever they've been inhaling during their shifts. The skin on your hands cracks and bleeds from constant exposure to chemicals and rough materials. Open wounds never heal properly because you can't keep them clean in the filthy environment where you work and live. Infections spread through cuts and scratches, turning minor injuries into life-threatening conditions. You watch fellow workers develop sores that eat through flesh and bone, but there's no money for doctors and no time for recovery. Your spine begins to curve from spending 14 hours a day bent over machinery. The constant stooping and repetitive motions reshape your skeleton in ways that make you look decades older than your actual age. Young people develop the shuffling gait of elderly invalids, their bodies permanently twisted by the demands of industrial production. Standing straight becomes impossible, and the pain radiates through your entire torso with every movement. The factory owners live in magnificent mansions on hills overlooking the industrial districts, far enough away to avoid breathing the poisoned air their businesses create. They host elaborate dinner parties where they discuss the moral benefits of providing employment to the working classes, while their guests dine on food that costs more than you'll earn in a lifetime. Their children attend private schools and universities, their futures secured by the profits extracted from your suffering. These same owners publish pamphlets about the civilizing influence of factory work, claiming that industrial discipline teaches valuable lessons about punctuality and responsibility. They argue that working conditions are actually quite reasonable, and that any complaints come from ungrateful employees who don't appreciate the opportunities they've been given. They fund studies that minimize the health risks and exaggerate the economic benefits of their operations. When workers try to organize or protest their treatment, the response is swift and brutal. Troublemakers are fired immediately and blacklisted from finding employment anywhere else in the region. Their names are circulated among factory owners to ensure they never work again. Families of activists are evicted from company housing and left to starve in the streets as an example to others who might consider speaking out. The legal system protects property owners rather than workers, so there's no recourse when you're cheated out of wages or injured by faulty equipment. Contracts are written in language you can't read, and the terms always favor the employer. If you're hurt on the job, you're responsible for your own medical expenses, assuming you can find a doctor willing to treat someone who can't pay in advance. Children who survive their factory apprenticeships emerge as hollow shells of what they should have become. Their growth is stunted. Their minds are damaged by years of repetitive labor instead of education, and their spirits are broken by constant abuse and exploitation. Many develop psychological conditions that leave them unable to function normally in any other environment. They become dependent on the very system that destroyed them, because it's the only world they've ever known. The few workers who manage to save enough money to escape factory life discover that the skills they've learned are completely useless anywhere else. Years of operating specific machines under strict supervision don't translate into abilities that employers in other industries value. They're trapped by their own experience, unable to imagine or pursue different types of work even when opportunities might exist. Entire communities become dependent on single factories or groups of related businesses, creating a form of economic slavery that extends far beyond individual workers. When owners decide to move operations to cheaper locations or invest in labor-saving machinery, thousands of people are left with no means of survival. Ghost towns spring up almost overnight as populations scatter in search of new forms of exploitation that might keep them alive a little longer. The environmental destruction spreads far beyond the immediate factory districts. Rivers run black with chemical waste, poison in fish, and making water undrinkable for miles downstream. Agricultural land becomes barren as acid rain kills crops and contaminates soil. The air pollution creates permanent fog banks that block sunlight and turn day into perpetual twilight in industrial regions. Women who work in textile factories face unique dangers that compound their already desperate situations. The machinery tears at long skirts and loose hair, causing injuries that male workers never experience. Pregnant women continue working until the moment they go into labor, because taking time off means losing wages their families can't survive without. Many give birth to children who are already damaged by exposure to industrial toxins and malnutrition. The pace of technological change accelerates without any consideration for human adaptation. New machines are introduced that require different skills and create different hazards, but workers are expected to master them immediately or face unemployment. There's no training period, no gradual transition, and no accommodation for people whose bodies have been shaped by years of performing other types of repetitive labor. Social reformers occasionally visit factory districts to document conditions and write reports for government committees. But their investigations are carefully managed affairs that reveal little about daily reality. They're shown model facilities during brief daylight hours when conditions are at their best, and they speak only with workers who've been coached on what to say. The resulting reports describe a sanitized version of industrial life that bears no resemblance to the truth. Religious institutions preach acceptance and patience to working-class congregations while receiving generous donations from factory owners who want to ensure that moral authority supports the existing economic system. Ministers speak about the spiritual benefits of suffering and the rewards that await the faithful in the afterlife. But they offer no practical help for people dying from preventable diseases and workplace injuries. The education system, such as it exists, is designed to produce compliant workers rather than independent thinkers. Children who are allowed to attend school for a few hours a day learn basic reading and arithmetic, but they're also taught to follow orders without question and accept their position in the social hierarchy. Critical thinking is discouraged because it might lead to uncomfortable questions about why some people live in luxury while others die in misery. Medical knowledge exists that could prevent many of the diseases and injuries that plague factory workers, but this information is not shared with the people who need it most. Doctors who serve wealthy clients understand the connections between poor sanitation and disease outbreaks, but they have no incentive to help working-class communities that can't pay for their services. The cycle repeats itself with each new generation, as children born into industrial poverty grow up to become factory workers themselves. There's no escape route, no path to advancement, and no hope that life will improve for their own children. The system perpetuates itself by destroying alternatives and crushing dreams before they can take root. This is the world that progress built, where human beings became fuel for machines that enriched a small class of owners while grinding everyone else into dust. The true cost of Victorian prosperity was measured not in pounds and shillings, but in the lives of millions of people who were sacrificed on the altar of industrial efficiency. Your body starts shutting down in ways that medical science barely understands. The constant exposure to metal shavings and chemical vapors creates new forms of illness that doctors have never seen before. Your skin develops a grayish tint that never washes off, marking you permanently as one of the industrial damned. Rashes spread across your arms and face, weeping sores that refuse to heal because your immune system has been overwhelmed by years of poisoning. The monotony becomes a form of torture that breaks minds as effectively as the physical labor breaks bodies. You perform the same motions thousands of times each day, watching the same mechanical processes repeat endlessly while your consciousness slowly dissolves. Some workers begin talking to themselves or to the machines, their grip on reality loosening under the pressure of absolute routine. Others simply stop speaking altogether, becoming mute witnesses to their own destruction. Factory fires become a constant threat because the buildings are constructed with profit margins in mind rather than human safety. Wooden floors soaked with oil and covered in cotton dust create perfect conditions for devastating blazes that can consume entire structures in minutes. The narrow staircases and blocked exits ensure that when fires do break out, workers are trapped inside burning buildings with no chance of escape. You watch fellow workers disappear without explanation, and you learn not to ask questions about where they went. Some collapse at their stations and are carried away, never to return. Others simply fail to show up one morning, and their positions are filled before the end of the day. The constant turnover of personnel becomes so normal that you stop learning names because there's no point in forming attachments to people who won't be there next week. The supervisors who control your daily existence are often former workers themselves, promoted specifically because their own suffering has made them cruel enough to inflict similar pain on others. They understand exactly how much abuse the human body can endure before it breaks completely, and they calibrate their demands accordingly. Their intimate knowledge of worker psychology makes them more effective tormentors than any outsider could be. Management techniques evolved to maximize extraction of labor while minimizing costs associated with worker welfare. Time studies are conducted to determine the absolute minimum number of seconds required for each task, and those measurements become the standard that everyone must meet regardless of their physical condition or experience level. Workers who can't maintain these inhuman paces are replaced immediately by others desperate enough to attempt the impossible. The housing situation deteriorates as more people flood into industrial areas seeking employment. Cellars flood with sewage during heavy rains, but families continue living in them because there's nowhere else to go. Multiple generations crowd into spaces designed for single occupants, with grandparents, parents, and children sharing beds and breathing each other's diseases. Privacy becomes a luxury that exists only in the memories of older workers who remember life before the factories. Malnutrition reaches levels that would shock observers from earlier centuries, despite the supposed prosperity that industrialization has brought to the nation. Workers become walking skeletons, their bodies consuming muscle tissue to survive when wages can't buy adequate food. Children develop rickets so severe that their bones bend under their own weight, creating permanent deformities that mark them as products of industrial poverty. The few medical professionals who venture into working-class neighborhoods are overwhelmed by conditions they've never encountered in their training. Diseases that should be easily treatable become fatal because patients can't afford medications or time away from work for recovery. Simple infections kill healthy adults because their bodies lack the resources to fight off illnesses that proper nutrition would have prevented. Factory owners experiment with new forms of worker control that go beyond traditional supervision. They install bells and whistles that signal different types of required behavior throughout the day, training human beings to respond to mechanical cues like laboratory animals. Workers internalize these signals so completely that they continue responding to phantom sounds long after they leave the factory environment. The legal framework supporting industrial operations becomes increasingly sophisticated at protecting capital while ignoring human costs. Laws are written by people who profit from factory operations, ensuring that regulations serve business interests rather than worker welfare. Court systems consistently rule in favor of property owners when disputes arise, creating a judicial environment where seeking justice becomes pointless for working-class plaintiffs. Transportation systems develop around industrial needs rather than human convenience, forcing workers to walk miles through dangerous neighborhoods to reach their jobs. The streets themselves become hazardous as heavy machinery and chemical transport create new forms of urban danger. Accidents involving industrial vehicles kill pedestrians regularly, but these deaths are treated as acceptable casualties of economic progress. Cultural institutions adapt their messages to support industrial discipline and discourage resistance to working conditions. Literature, music, and art begin celebrating the supposed virtues of factory life while ignoring its destructive reality. Popular entertainment reinforces themes about the nobility of hard work and the moral failings of people who complain about their circumstances. The psychological impact of industrial labor extends far beyond individual workers to affect entire communities. Families fragment under the pressure of impossible schedules and economic desperation. Parents become strangers to their children because work demands consume every waking hour. Marriages dissolve when couples never see each other except during brief periods of exhausted collapse. Social hierarchies become more rigid as industrial wealth concentrates in fewer hands while working populations grow larger and more desperate. The gap between owners and workers expands into a chasm that no amount of individual effort can bridge. Upward mobility becomes virtually impossible as the skills required for advancement are kept secret, and the educational opportunities that might provide them are systematically denied to working-class children. Environmental degradation accelerates as more factories compete to maximize production regardless of long-term consequences. The landscape itself becomes industrial, with natural features buried under slag heaps and chemical waste. Rivers that once supported fishing communities become open sewers carrying industrial poisons to the sea. The very air becomes a weapon against human health, delivering toxins with every breath. Innovation focuses exclusively on increasing production efficiency, rather than improving working conditions or reducing human suffering. New machines are designed to run faster and require less skilled operation, making workers even more replaceable and driving wages down further. Technical advances that could reduce dangerous or unhealthy aspects of production are ignored if they don't contribute directly to profit margins. The cycle of exploitation becomes self-perpetuating as each generation of workers raises children who know no other life than industrial servitude. Hope disappears from working-class communities as people realize that their situation will never improve, and their children face the same fate. The promise of progress reveals itself as a lie told by those who benefit from other people's misery. Yet somehow you continue. Tomorrow that whistle will sound again, and you'll drag yourself back to the machines that are slowly killing you. Because in this world they've created, the choice isn't between a good life and a bad one. The choice is between a terrible life and no life at all. Choice is between a terrible life and no life at all. This was the true cost of Victorian progress, paid in broken bodies and shattered lives. Millions endured this nightmare so that a few could build empires on human suffering. Remember their sacrifice the next time someone romanticizes the Industrial Revolution, because those machines didn't just manufacture textiles, they manufactured human misery.